You have to understand the man he had become by then. The 1970s Elvis was not the 1950s Elvis. That feels obvious to say, but it's the key to everything. The first one was a threat. He was a kid who shook his hips and made people nervous. He sang music that parents hated. It felt new, it felt dangerous. He changed the world with a curled lip and a borrowed sound that he made his own. He was a force of nature, a rebel. Then came the army, then came the movies. For the better part of a decade, he was safe. He was handsome and charming, singing on a beach or in a race car. The songs were mostly forgettable. They were soundtrack filler. The danger was gone. He was a Hollywood product. He was rich and famous, but he wasn't relevant anymore. He wasn't part of the conversation. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Bob Dylan, Jimi Hendrix. They were the conversation. He was a memory. The 1968 happened, the television special. He stood on a small stage, surrounded by an audience, and he wore black leather. He was thin, he was hungry, he snarled, he sweated, he played the guitar like he meant it. He reminded everyone who he was. Not the movie star, the rock and roller. It was a stunning comeback. It was a resurrection. This led to a new period of creativity. He went to Memphis to record. He cut some of the best music of his career. Songs with depth and soul. Songs about social issues, about paranoia, about adult heartbreak. He was back on the radio with massive, important sounding hits. He was a grown-up now. The voice was bigger, more powerful than ever. He wasn't a boy anymore, he was a man. And this new man went to Las Vegas. This is where the 70s Elvis was truly born. The International Hotel, the biggest stage, the biggest showroom. He put together the best band in the business. A killer rhythm section, a virtuoso lead guitarist. He added a full orchestra. He had 2 sets of backup singers, 1 male gospel quartet, 1 female soul group. The sound was immense. It was an earthquake. This was the new king. He didn't wear leather anymore. He wore jumpsuits, white, blue, gold, decorated with jewels and chains and studs. He wore a cape. He looked like a superhero, or maybe a god from some strange, glitzy religion. When he walked on stage, they played the theme from 2001: A Space Odyssey. It was not subtle. The message was clear. This was not a concert. This was an event. This was the arrival of a monumental being. The music matched the spectacle. It was huge. He sang his old hits, but they were rearranged. They were faster, louder, more explosive. He sang gospel songs with the power of a tent revival preacher. But the core of the show became the ballads, big, emotional, heart-wrenching ballads. Songs about divorce, about loneliness, about looking back on life. His voice could fill every corner of that giant room. It could make you feel every word. He was a master showman, a brilliant interpreter of a sad song. This was the new Elvis that most people think of. The Vegas Elvis, a living legend performing for sold-out crowds. He was an institution. He was no longer a threat to the establishment. He was the establishment. He was playing by the rules of showbiz, and he was winning. He was bigger than ever. But there was a problem. It was becoming a routine. The shows were incredible, but they were also predictable. The set list didn't change much. The risks were gone. He was coasting on his legend. The recordings in the early 70s reflected this. He was still having hits, but many of them were those big, serious ballads. They were good, sometimes they were great, but where was the fun? Where was the fire? Where was the kid in the black leather? He was getting divorced, he was dealing with health problems. Sure, he was getting bored. The creative spark that had been reignited in 1968 was beginning to fade. He was trapped in the golden cage of Las Vegas. The machine he had built was now running him. He was performing the same show, night after night, city after city. He needed something, a jolt. A shot of pure energy. And then a song came along. It wasn't written for him. It was written by a Nashville songwriter named Dennis Linde. The writer's own version was kind of funky, a little swampy. It was a cool track, but it wasn't a monster. The song got passed to Elvis's people. His producer liked it. Elvis himself was not so sure. He reportedly thought the lyrics were a bit silly. There's a line in there about a hunk of something, and it felt a little clumsy to him. It wasn't a deep, meaningful song about love and loss. It was a song about feeling hot. It was simple, primal. He was in the studio in Hollywood in March of 1972. The sessions were okay, but not spectacular. They were recording more ballads, sad songs that fit the mood of his personal life. But they decided to give this other song a try, and something happened in that studio. The band kicked in. The drummer, the great Ronnie Tutt, wasn't playing a standard Vegas beat. He was playing a frantic, driving, almost chaotic rhythm. It pushed and pushed and never let up. The bass player, Emery Gordy Jr., locked in with him, creating a relentless, pulsing foundation. Then came the guitar. James Burton, the master, wasn't playing his usual clean, country-inspired licks. He laid down a dirty, fuzzy, distorted riff. It was a 70s rock riff. It could have come from a dozen other, younger bands. It was loud and aggressive. And on top of this powerful, noisy rock and roll, they layered horns. Not sweet, schmaltzy horns. They were sharp, punctuating blasts of sound that added to the excitement. The whole thing was a wall of sound. It was loud, it was fast, it was raw. Then Elvis sang. He didn't croon. He didn't deliver a polished, perfect Vegas vocal. He yelled. He screamed. He pushed his voice to the edge. You can hear the strain. You can hear the commitment. He wasn't just singing the words, he was living them. When he sings that the temperature is rising, you believe him. His voice is pure adrenaline. It's the sound of a man letting go of all the sadness, all the boredom, all the pressure, and just having fun for 3 minutes. The backup singers weren't just adding sweet harmonies, they were shouting back at him. It was a call and response, like a gospel choir on fire. The whole thing builds and builds until the final, explosive ending, where his voice just soars over the top of the chaos. He holds that last note, and it's a moment of pure release. When you listen to it, it sounds completely different from everything else he was doing at the time. His other single from that period was a beautiful, heartbreaking ballad about his divorce. It was called Separate Ways. Fine song, an adult song. This new track was the opposite of that. It wasn't adult, it wasn't reflective, it was pure, unfiltered, youthful energy. It was about lust, not love. It was a simple, dumb, glorious rock and roll song. The record company released it. And it was a smash, a huge hit. It rocketed up the charts. It was his last top 10 hit in the United States. In a world of glam rock, hard rock, and singer-songwriters, he was back on the radio, not as a nostalgia act, but as a contender. He sounded as current and as powerful as anyone. People loved it. It was impossible not to. The energy was infectious. It immediately became the centerpiece of his live show. You can see it in the footage from the documentary Elvis on Tour, filmed that same year. He comes out on stage in the full jumpsuit regalia. He looks like a god. The band launches into the song. He often needs a sheet with the lyrics. He hadn't quite memorized them yet. But it doesn't matter. He's not focused on the words. He's focused on the feeling. He attacks the song. He throws himself into it. He kicks. He chops the air. He sweats. The band is a force of nature behind him. Ronnie Tutt on drums is a blur of motion, a human engine driving the whole thing forward. James Burton's guitar stings and bites. The whole performance is a high-wire act. It's a moment where the polished Vegas showman disappears and the raw rock and roller from 1968 from 1956 reappears. It's a blast of pure, unadulterated rock and roll in the middle of a tightly choreographed Vegas spectacle. The crowds would go insane. It was the peak of the night. It was the moment the king cut loose. So, was this the song that defined the new Elvis of the 1970s? This is the real question. And the answer is complicated. It's yes and no. In one way, yes, absolutely. It defined the potential of the 70s Elvis. It was the perfect synthesis of everything he had become. Well, it had the scale and power of his Vegas show. The huge band, the horns, the giant sound. But it also had the raw, untamed energy of his youth. It was the showman and the rebel combined into one explosive package. It proved that the jumpsuit-wearing king could still rock harder than anyone. It was the sound of his incredible band, the TCB Band, at the absolute peak of their powers. It was a stadium rock anthem before the term was even common. It was the ultimate expression of the 70s Elvis at his very best, powerful, professional, but still dangerous. It defined the high point. The moment when all the pieces came together in a perfect, fiery explosion. But in another, more honest way, the answer is no. It didn't define him because it was an exception. It wasn't the rule, it was a beautiful, glorious outlier. After that song, he didn't follow it up with a string of other high-energy rock hits. He didn't pivot to become a 70s hard rock artist. He could have. This song proved he had the voice, the band, and the charisma to do it. But he didn't. Instead, he went back to the ballads. He went back to the gospel. He went back to the country songs. The live shows started to include more and more big, dramatic numbers and fewer of the old rock and roll classics. The setlist became more predictable again. The energy of that one song was a flash in the pan. A brilliant one, but a flash nonetheless. The new Elvis of the 1970s, for better or worse, was the man who sang My Way with tears in his eyes. He was the man who delivered the grand, operatic, and American trilogy. He was the man who could break your heart with a sad ballad. That was his reality, night after night. That was the artist he had chosen to be. He was the showman, the legend, the man in the cape. This one rock song was something else. It was a vacation from that reality. It was a reminder of who he used to be and who he could still be when he felt like it. That it was the sound of him cutting loose. It was the last time he sounded truly current on a rock and roll record. The last time he had a genuine bona fide, up-tempo smash hit that felt like it belonged in its time. So maybe it didn't define the man he was for the rest of the decade, but it defined his peak. It defined the best version of him. It was a final, brilliant flare before the slow decline began. It was a reminder that underneath the jewels and the capes and the weight of his own legend, the rock and roll kid was still in there. He was just waiting for the right song to let him out. This song wasn't a new beginning. It turned out to be more of a glorious ending. The last great rock and roll statement from the man who started it all. It was the sound of a fire that was about to burn out, but for 3 glorious minutes, it burned brighter than the sun. Lord Almighty. You can still feel the heat. The song was burning love.